Welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Perry with the Circle of Atonement here with Circle founder Robert Perry. And today we are talking about, is A Course in Miracles self-study? Whether you are a new student of the course or whether you've been on this path for a while, if you just take yourself back to that time when you first discovered this path and you wanted to learn more about it, we can pretty much guarantee that one of the first things you heard about the course is that it's a quote unquote self-study path. Robert did a bit of poking around online this morning about how the course is described on various websites. And the first things we saw were that A Course in Miracles is a unique spiritual self-study program. A Course in Miracles is a self-study psychological mind training. A Course in Miracles is a self-study curriculum. A Course in Miracles is a psycho-spiritual self-study text. A Course in Miracles is a self-study book. A Course in Miracles is a self-study spiritual teaching. A Course in Miracles is a self-study spiritual thought system. A Course in Miracles is a volume of written materials arranged as a self-study course, and the list goes on and on. And it is very curious that these descriptions of A Course in Miracles so often appear on websites that teach A Course in Miracles. And it's also interesting that even though these descriptions don't agree on whether the course is a program or whether it's a mind training or a curriculum or a text or a book or a teaching or a thought system, everyone agrees that it's self-study. As students, we hear this so much that it's just accepted and continually repeated as true that A Course in Miracles is self-study. But is it true? As a spoiler alert, in this podcast, Robert and I are going to make a case that A Course in Miracles is not self-study. And it's our hope and the hope of all of us here at the Circle that we can meaningfully turn this conversation around. And that's where I think I want to begin, Robert, because on the surface, I think this can seem like one of those issues that isn't really a big deal. I can picture people watching or listening to this and thinking, okay, so people describe the course as self-study, so what? But this is something that you have been talking about literally for decades now. And so I just love to hear upfront, why do you think we should care about this topic as students of this path?
We should care because that one term, self-study, has profoundly shaped how people see the course and how they do the course. The public perception is this is a book that you go through on your own. And that's generally what people do or think they should do. You buy the book from the bookstore and you study it on your own. It's a self-guided tour. And what that means, I mean, that has shaped the landscape. And what it means is it's kind of this book you just do with what you want. And I think if you're just doing with it what you want, you end up taking it less seriously. Obviously, studying it on your own for most people is not going to lead to the same level of seriousness as if you're studying with a teacher. And most of all, as we will say over the course of this episode, most of all, it's meant that the system that Jesus instituted in the course, and it's there in black and white, in which there are teachers, it's not self-study. Um, that whole system, the only guidance we have from the author on how we study this book has been overlooked and ignored now for 50 years. One of the big problems, I think, that anyone can see with the self-study concept is that everyone, as soon as you get the book, is desperate for help. Okay? The course is highly sophisticated. It teaches extremely unconventional ideas. All of its major terms are familiar terms that it has reinterpreted without telling you exactly what the new definition is. So people end up feeling like they've just been dropped off on an alien planet. And if that's your situation, you're desperate for a guide. And that's what people go looking for. Very few people are content with self study, even while we embrace the term. We try to find study groups, we try to find teachers, books, videos, websites, workshops, conferences, retreats, you name it, all of which doesn't really fit with self study, right? So, for instance, one of the oldest course organizations, which offers what I assume is the most complete listing of study groups, they say, while the course is primarily a self study program, many hundreds of study groups have been established worldwide. So there's an acknowledgement that there's a tension between what we say about the course as self study and what we all, almost all, actually do.
There is a whole conversation to be had about this because, as you've pointed out, the ramifications of where you land on this issue are enormous, and we're going to get into that. But I think it's important upfront and here at the beginning to say that there is real evidence for why the course is not self-study. So, number one, it has a manual for teachers. And having a manual for teachers is the exact opposite of self study. Number two, the course never once refers to itself as self study, not one time. You will not find those words in the book itself. Number three, the manual for teachers repeatedly uses the word pupil and talks directly about an actual person, not just the Holy Spirit, helping someone learn this path. And then there's just all of the instruction, particularly in the manual, about how a teacher is meant to carry out his or her role. And just I don't know if it's necessarily a side point, it's a super interesting point to me that, Robert, you've pointed out that you can be a student of a book, but you can only be a pupil of another teacher. And therein is more evidence because the manual repeatedly uses the word pupil instead of student. So I know that's one of your pet points. Do you want to say anything more about that?
Right. If you listen to the speech of course students, we all say student, but the manual has 21 references to pupil, one reference to a student in the sense of a student being the student of a teacher. Um, and interestingly, if you look at those references to pupil, they are all framed. The pupil is always framed as the pupil of a teacher. In fact, in 18 of those 21 references, the teacher is mentioned in the same sentence as the pupil. So the word pupil here is being used in the standard sense of someone who has a teacher.
Right. And not just, as I was saying a minute ago, not just our internal teacher of the Holy Spirit, but another person who's leading a pupil through the material.
Right. I mean, that other person is right there in all those sentences with the word pupil in them, all but three, and those three, it's like one sentence away.
Right. Okay, so we'll get into all of these things, but I just want to start with the first and again most glaring proof that the course is not self-study. And that's the fact that it has a manual for teachers. And one would think that it would just be case closed right there. Um, Again, having a manual for teachers is the exact opposite of self-study. So, Robert, I'm just curious as to why you think that you think we're so locked in to this idea of the course being self-study, despite all of this very obvious evidence to the contrary.
I think that it's understandable. When you get the course, you're told very quickly it's self-study. Um, the what is said in the preface in the FIP edition about the manual for teachers is just basically an FAQ for students. The description of the manual in the preface doesn't use the word teacher. Um, Also, historically, the course began being published in three separate volumes. And the only place to put the clarification of terms, which was received 3 years after the rest of the course, it was an afterthought, an add-on. The only place to put that was in the third volume, the Manual for Teachers volume. And then it became considered to be part of the Manual for Teachers. So now the manual has a series of questions and answers, okay? And then it has this glossary. So it's kind of an FAQ plus a glossary. And in all of this, I think just the conditioning that we all got has been so strong. I mean, it literally took me 10 years as a course student. And one day I thought, hang on, but 10 years, that conditioning was so strong. Another thing is, I think we all probably know that spiritual circles, New Age circles especially, have a strong kind of anti-authority sentiment. We don't want some authority over us. We don't want a teacher telling us what to do. We don't want to feel like we're back in school. Okay. We all love the idea the only authority is the Holy Spirit within me. And so I think that, we just don't, we love the idea that we can do whatever we want with this book. There's no teacher over us.
Mhm. I think there's something else too. And, forever now here at the Circle, we've been talking about how the definition of a miracle as it appears in the Course is primarily expressions of love. And yet, when you hear what a miracle is in the community at large, it's a shift in perception from fear to love. And and so you wonder, like, where do these ideas kind of come from? And then a few years ago, you and I got a book. I think it was from Jerry Jampolsky, and Bill Thetford, co-scribe of the course himself, had done the introduction or the foreword to that book. And in it, Bill wrote something like miracles, those shifts in perception from fear to love. And you and I were like, oh my God, there it is, right there at the beginning of the course's story. It's easy to think that, oh, Bill said that miracles are shifts in perception from fear to love. And then it just caught like wildfire.
Mm.
And now all of a sudden, it almost doesn't even matter how many times the course refers to miracles as expressions of love, which is not, no, it's 6, by the way.
Yeah.
And then it never refers to miracles as quote unquote shifts in perception, although we do consider that to be a
The
secondary
idea can be
definition.
found, the idea can be, but the words are not there.
So here's my point. My point is that the things that you can trace back to Helen and Bill, the co-scribes of the course, those are the things that have tremendous authority. And it's always been your hunch that this idea of the course being self-study goes back to Helen and Bill as well. So where do you get that? Why do you think that?
Well, I thought it must have come from the early gang, Helen, Bill, Ken Wapnick, Judy Sketch-Whitson. And I did ask Judy and Ken at one point some years ago if they remember where that term came from. Neither of them did. Ken said, so neither of them came up with it. Ken said that, he thought it was Helen, which makes sense. So it was Helen or Bill. I assume that's the most likely case. And remember, neither Helen nor Bill wanted to be a teacher of this course. So there you have to wonder about a little bit of unconscious bias in there in coming up with that term self-study.
Hmm. Either way, wherever it came from, again, we see this all the time. And I mentioned earlier, the course never refers to itself as self-study. If you do a search for that phrase, you're not going to find it in the course. I know I'm repeating myself at this point,
Also,
but
just
if
let me add that the concept it never says self-study and it never says this is a course you study on your own, you take yourself through. So the term's not there, but the idea's not there either.
So that brings me to my question. If the course doesn't refer to itself as self-study, how what's the truth here? How does it refer to himself to itself?
Well, as you said, and it took me so long to recognize this, even when I saw teacher and pupil talked about in the way they are within the manual, I didn't appreciate the importance of the title. Like the first blindingly obvious thing that our conditioning has kind of made us blind to
I think a
is
lot of
that,
people were probably pretty relieved by that, by the way, to hear that it took you 10 years to figure out that the course wasn't self-study.
and a
Just saying.
further many years to appreciate the full import of the title Manual for Teachers. Like, that's huge, right? This thing has a manual for teachers, and we know what a teacher's manual is. I found an online definition here. A teacher's manual, often called a teacher's guide, is a resource provided to instructors to support and enhance their teaching. It serves as a companion to the primary curriculum or textbook used in the classroom and provides detailed information to help the teacher effectively deliver that material. So we all know, I mean, I don't need to even read this, but we know that a teacher's manual is there to help the teacher guide their students, excuse me, through that course's text and its workbook too, if it has a workbook, right? But we know the image. And for that reason, the very fact that the third volume of A Course in Miracles is a manual for teachers makes a huge statement. It tells us instantly that there are teachers who will guide students through this course, A Course in Miracles, using this teacher's manual to help them do that. And let's, I think, really appreciate that. I mean, to find if the teacher's manual of this course has nothing to do with being a teacher's manual, that would be like being given a workbook and opening it up to find that it has no exercises, no practice problems, nothing that you work on. Like, that would be crazy.
And then you open the manual, and the very first thing you see are the sections who are God's teachers and who are their pupils. Like he's not hiding this.
Right. And those sections are what initially clued me into this. And I want to highlight all you need is three sentences from those first two sections, who are God's teachers and who are their pupils. And this is over. The case is closed. Okay, so I want to read these three sentences and make a bit of a big deal about them. The first sentence from section 1 says, there is a course for every teacher of God. And what that means in that language, the course there is like a spiritual path. What that means is every teacher of God is given a particular path to teach. Okay? First sentence. Second sentence comes from the second section. It says, they, referring to the pupils, were chosen for him, the teacher, because the form of the universal curriculum that he will teach is best for them in view of their level of understanding. So, put it in more plain language, certain pupils are assigned to each teacher because the path he teaches is the one they need to learn. So we have clearly teachers teaching a certain path, pupils being assigned to those teachers because that's the path they need to learn. And that's all very generic, right? He talks about teachers from all over the world, from all religions and no religion. But then comes the third key sentence from the first section says, this is a manual for a special curriculum intended for teachers of a special form of the universal course. Now, I think we all know that the special curriculum, the special form of the universal course, refers to A Course in Miracles itself. So he's basically saying this is a manual for A Course in Miracles intended for teachers of A Course in Miracles. And when you put those three sentences together, you get an inescapable picture. Every teacher of God has a certain path that he will teach. His pupils are assigned to him because they need to learn that path. And this manual is for teachers of A Course in Miracles, which implies that there will be pupils assigned to them who need to learn A Course in Miracles from them. I don't see how you can look at those three sentences clearly and get out of that. It's airtight.
Well, ideally, it would have been airtight before you even got to those three sentences, just by virtue of the fact that there's a manual for teachers itself.
I
But
know.
beyond that, he does have a picture in the manual of this process that a teacher and a pupil go through. So, can you kind of walk us through that process and how he envisions the teacher pupil relationship in the manual?
Yes, this is something I've given so much attention and study to. You have to combine the implications of the title of the manual, which we've been talking about, of course, what's said in those first two key sections, who are God's teachers and who are their pupils, and then what is said in four later sections that specifically talk about a course teacher guiding his course pupils. Okay. If you add all that up, and those later sections are 17, 18, 24, and 29. If you add it all up, here's the picture you get. And everything I'm saying below is there in the manual. Okay. So a teacher of the course qualifies by having completed the course up through the workbook, what I often call the course proper, like volumes 1 and 2. Their job is to guide people through this course. Their assigned pupils now begin looking for them because those pupils need to learn A Course in Miracles from them. When teacher and pupil meet, they form a one-to-one mentorship in which the course is what is taught and learned. The teacher is consistently framed as being there from the start. He asks the Holy Spirit what volume the pupil should start with, or if the pupil is even ready for A Course in Miracles. That's huge. He then guides the pupil through that particular volume that's being started with. This involves accurate conceptual teaching. For instance, he doesn't teach that reincarnation is part of the course's thought system. It also involves helping the pupil apply what he's reading to his personal problems and issues. For instance, if the pupil thinks he can solve his problems on his own, without God, without the course, the teacher's job, his main job, is to let go of any subtle anger he may have about that and ask for guidance on how to respond in a helpful way. The teacher is meant to guide the pupil through the early stages of his time with the course, in which his ego will be kicking up a lot of resistance, having a lot of problems with the course and what it's teaching. Guide the pupil to ultimately a mature acceptance of the course as his path. Through this process of teaching and learning, the boundaries between teacher and pupil, quote, fade and grow dim and disappear. Through that process of growing closer, the teacher becomes an advanced teacher of God with the 10 characteristics of God's teachers, and the pupil becomes a teacher. And his assigned pupils now look for him, and the whole thing starts over. The chain keeps going.
You were saying this morning when we were talking about this podcast that one-on-one relationship that he's outlining here with teacher and pupil is how he tends to do things. He wants that one-on-one relationship, whether it's teacher pupil or a holy relationship or therapist patient, and he must recognize on some level that we really do need help, and that's his preferred method of sharing this material.
Well, there's so much we could say. Of course, he knows we need help. One of my little favorite things that I've researched in the course several times is the course's references to itself. It's about 160 of them. And what's interesting is just how much those references are pervaded by the theme that we, as the student of the course, are having a hard time with it. We're resisting, we're struggling, right? He knows we need help. Um, and like you're saying, he knows that system of a one-to-one relationship is key for our salvation. It's key for us emerging from these separate egos, but it's also key to how we learn. Humans learn best when taught one-on-one. And for some examples, in classical music, you have a teacher. It is exceptionally rare to be an accomplished top tier classical musician without formal training under a teacher. In PhD programs, you have your doctoral advisor. And most pertinent here, in spiritual traditions around the world, any tradition that is aiming for the heights of spiritual development, for extremes in spiritual advancement, places the personal spiritual guide in a foundational position. This is something that's been discovered again and again and again around the world. It's just the way it's done. It's the way it's always been done.
Yeah, I've talked about this before, but in my role of executive director here at the Circle, I'm responsible for growth, and growth means scaling. And so I'm particularly interested in things that scale. And it's also just my preferred, I prefer to teach groups versus one-on-one. And so I came in here with a focus on, okay, let's go and let's teach as many people as possible at a time. And then one day I remember you kind of sat me down and you were like, look, the one-on-one model, not that I was disparaging it, but I wasn't focused on it. And you were like, the one-on-one model is Jesus's model here in the book. It's the only thing that he talks about in terms of how learning is transferred. He doesn't mention workshops. He doesn't mention study groups. He only mentions this one-on-one relationship. And I had to say uncle to that, right? I mean, if it's in the course, then I have to kind of say, okay, well, if this is the way that he wants the course to be taught, then I guess we'll have to make some arrangements to have one-on-one teachers and have a resuscitate the teacher-pupil initiative that we'll talk about here in a minute. But I don't know if there's anything more to say about that
Sure. Yeah.
one-on-one relationship that he has in mind, but it's very big that it's the only one he mentions.
It's huge. Yeah, here is the only system instituted in the pages of the course. It's basically the focus of the title of the third volume and the focus of much of the third volume. Okay, out of 3 volumes. So it's huge. And this is why I feel so passionately about it, because this is his system for how he envisioned the course being done in the world. He talks about it so much more as a path that you learn from your teacher than a book you buy from the bookstore. Every time he talks about it, just about, he frames the teacher as being there right at the start. It's the teacher asking what volume you start with, asking for guidance about that. One thing I want to point out, though, is that, and so anyway, for me, just to get back to why I feel so passionate about it, like we're just ignoring it. It's his system, and we're just ignoring it. And one thing I like about what you said was you were like, well, I had to just say uncle. And well, if it's his system, that's that. And I wish that was everyone's attitude. I'll tell a story here. After I made this discovery in the early 90s, I asked my teaching partner, Alan Watson, to float a paper I was writing about it on an internet forum that he was very active on, and just say, hey guys, what do you think about this? Can you poke holes in my argument? Can you challenge my evidence? And I thought I can tighten the paper up through this. And to my surprise, I shouldn't have been surprised, but to my surprise, no one, not one person addressed any of the evidence. They had one question alone. What was my motive for making this up? What was my angle? What was my game here? And what I want to say is like, there's no game here. If you can look at the evidence in the manual, which is in black and white, and have another explanation for it, great. We can't. And we've been looking at this at the circle here for over 30 years. It's right there. It's in plain view. Um, and we're not doing it. We've collectively agreed that it can't mean that. And I think that that's the sad thing. Like, surely there are people playing course mentors here and there, formally or informally, but it's nowhere near an acknowledged, it's the opposite of an acknowledged thing or an organized thing. And
Mhm.
so, you know, we, one way or the other, we're going to see this established in the world.
Part of why it hasn't been established in the world, this teacher pupil relationship, more than it has, is because there's the relatively new nature of the course itself. It's a path that's only 50 years old, but part of it is the student. If everyone thinks that the course is self-study, then there's no real demand for teachers. And part of this is the teachers themselves. We've seen, as we've done study group leader training and whatnot, that there's a lot of people who feel called to share the course, but then get really stymied because it seems too complex, too big of a job, too large of a hurdle to overcome. And so that's a bit of a perfect storm for why we don't have more teachers in the world. But there's another issue for me that goes pretty deep, and it's how do we create healthy teachers? Who's qualified to teach the course? What does that even mean? Um, do do we have teachers who are going to be in furtherance of a student's journey and not set them back? You spend 5 minutes in spiritual community and you know that there's a million different ways it can go wrong. And if you don't know that there's a million different ways it can go wrong, just watch one of the 50 million cult documentaries that are everywhere. And so, given that this role is so important, as a teacher, you're kind of in there in someone's psyche. And that's a serious and a very sacred thing. And yet, given the importance of a teaching role, wouldn't it be better to have training, even imperfect training, than to not have any training at all?
Of course, of course. I think the first hurdle to get over is just to look at it there in the book, on the cover of the manual, in key sections in the manual. I can point out to anyone where this is discussed quite openly. Um, so the first hurdle is just admitting this is not self-study. He instituted a system in which there are teachers, course teachers, who take on course pupils on a one-to-one basis. The second thing is, okay, like now we got a mess on our hands. I think everyone, I mean, I've been talking about this as I've said for over 30 years. Everyone tends to greet it as a negative, like there's going to be abuse and this and that. And I think we should instead say, okay, there's going to be a how do we get from here to there? How do we get a truly healthy system in place that's functioning, that's bringing people along? But we should see the ultimate goal as such a positive. Like, how many of us can think if I had had a good mentor in the course, I could have saved myself years or decades. Like, the promise here is huge. It's beautiful. Our spiritual heroes throughout history, you know, probably the vast majority of them got there because they had a personal teacher. So let's see the promise in this. And then let's also see that, yeah, it's going to be hard to get there. And of course, there's always going to be people who are, not healthy and who are not a healthy influence and are even abusive. But let's not, ignore the fact that decades of self-study have not, they have been, in my view, largely a failure. We don't really treat the course with the seriousness that the course itself expects. Um, Surely that would be different if the students you look at all had good personal teachers. So we don't just have the luxury of saying, well, we better avoid the unhealthy teachers. We have more than that to avoid.
I hear you on that. And I really appreciate, and I know I speak for so many here at the circle who say that this place has saved me and others years on our own journey with the course. You say it took you 10 years to figure out that the course wasn't self-study. Well, hopefully a podcast like this can save others the time who are new to the course. For example, someone's just learning about it and then can instantly get, oh, okay, well, there's a manual for teachers. It's not self-study. Now I can go about the business of trying to find someone who can explain this 2,000-page tome to me. And so that process of saving time is big. And also the one-on-one relationship is big. When it's done right, it's a beautiful thing. I've been someone who has benefited from personal mentors throughout my life, and I don't know where I would be without them. So I'm not disparaging the idea of a teacher-pupil relationship. At the same time, there are so many ways in which it can go wrong, and the circle has tried to get a teacher pupil initiative off the ground. And honestly, it has not really taken root in the 30 plus years of this organization. And I have some things to say about that. But I'm sure that there is some curiosity about why you think the circle's efforts to get a teacher pupil initiative off the ground haven't quite borne fruit.
Well, I'll say a bit about that. I mean, for 9 years, we did have what we called the Teacher Pupil Initiative. We really tried. Our hope is that it would gather momentum and spread. But over time, what we found was that most of the teachers that we trained um, kind of fell away from that teaching role. I think we had a lot that needed to be tweaked in terms of the framework we presented. I think that framework needed to be grounded more solidly in what the manual actually says. Specifically, I think we needed more focus on taking new students of the course through the book, through the volumes. Um, on the other hand, we just haven't had, we have a lot more success. I mean, I'll just say it, a lot more success now that you're here in actually moving forward initiatives. So it wasn't just the teacher pupil thing, it was the study group thing. We had a lot of things we wanted to form, and we just are doing, we have a better batting rate now that you're around in getting initiatives to move forward and take root and actually grow. I mean, I know that probably sounds somewhat uncomfortable for me to be saying that when you're sitting here, but that's the truth. What I will say is that at least we tried. We really tried. The people on the teaching side, the people on the trainee side, we learned a huge amount. And I think we are now, having stepped back from it for several years, we're now in a position to come back to it sometime in the next, however many months or years from a much better standpoint, a much more solid, more healthy standpoint. Um, and, you learn from your mistakes.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't say that there's a whole team here that are helping us move things forward in what I feel in, and I know you feel as well, Robert, is a truly healthy way. And one of the things that I've learned over just observing the efforts of teacher pupil relationships and the initiative more broadly here at the circle is that some have worked amazingly, and you can have that lightning kind of relationship where you can't really explain why it works so well, it just does. And there are some teacher pupil relationships here that are just magic, in the best sense of the word. But where I've really wanted to kind of move the organization in, and you alluded to this earlier, is I want to move us into a teacher pupil initiative that is about the business of what the manual says a teacher pupil relationship is about. And that means that the teacher is taking the pupil through the book, and the teacher isn't trying to be the therapist of the student, although in the process of going through the book there are going to naturally be times where the pupil says, I'm going through this thing, how does this section apply to the situation in my life? But I've just seen a lot of things go wrong when the teacher tries to be all things, and the teacher tries to be the therapist, and the teacher tries to be the coach, and it just, I think a healthier initiative will form around being very clear that the role of the teacher in this case is to walk a student through the book cover to cover. and
Yeah,
and I'm looking forward to getting that started.
I think that's key. And back in the day, we talked about that as like a model, but that's the model. And I think that obviously that's going to involve application. I mean, every section, every lesson points at application. But yeah, I mean, there's so much about the old framework that we had that was my framework, that I don't think was really right or ideal. And I think now that we step back, we do things differently. I think we're ready to, at some point in the not so distant future, step back into this. And, to be honest, I'll, we just in the past weren't so good at grounding initiatives and getting them to grow. We're better at that now. Um, and I think we could do a really good, healthy version of this.
That's the goal. And we do hope to launch a new teacher pupil initiative sometime next year. As we're recording this, it's January of 2025. We're looking at a resuscitated teacher pupil initiative for 2026. In the meantime, though, we do have study group leader training. I'm going to talk about that here in just a minute, but that's something that we've had for the last few years, and it's a stepping stone. It's not that one-on-one relationship, it's group relationship, but at the same time, for anyone who feels called to be a teacher, to share this work, that would be a good place to start. So I don't know if there's anything you want to say about the difference between a teacher pupil relationship and study group leaders, but
I
I'd
think
love
the
to
main
hear if
thing
you
to
have thoughts on
say
it.
is this just a softer version of teacher pupil. As you said, it's not one to one, it's in a group. Um, but the way we teach people to be a study group leader is to be a leader, not just a facilitator. There is this kind of super egalitarian ethos in spiritual circles, in Course in Miracles circles. It's like everyone should be teachers and students of each other. People think that's even a quote from the Course, and it's not. And so we teach people to be actual leaders of their group, gentle leaders, loving leaders. Um, in our model, these study group leaders do they take their groups through the volumes, just like the teacher is meant to do with pupils. Um, and there is a major focus on practical application. So it's really the way that we teach study group leader training is a soft version of the teacher pupil role. It's kind of a start in that direction. And that's part of why we've devoted so much to the process of training these leaders. We've done several iterations, we keep fine tuning it. We're now presenting it in a way that's more suited to how our audience likes to consume content. We have leader guides that literally give you your meeting in a box every single week, all the way through the text and all the way through the workbook. These leader guides contain a little summary of each section and lesson. They contain juicy quotes that your group members can read aloud. They contain exercises for you to take your group through. We teach you how to use the guides. We teach you about group facilitation and group dynamics. We teach you about being a good listener answering questions. We've got about 50 some groups going now. We support them monthly. The leaders support each other. So we're really trying to build a whole culture. And our picture is that eventually, out of that culture, out of that training as a prerequisite, we will then take people further who want to do the one-on-one teacher of pupil role. Um, so I think that this has been a really good, all the focus we've put on training study group leaders has been a really good foundation to lay, and out of that soil can grow, I think, hopefully a more thriving and enduring teacher pupil tradition.
And into that, someone has to do it. Right?
Someone's got to do
Like
it.
someone
Yeah.
has to get this thing started for the course in the world because this is Jesus's model. Again, I've had to say uncle on that. So if this is the way Jesus wants to share his book, then it's the onus is on us to make it happen. And
Can I just
I go
just break
ahead.
in here? I know this is a radical idea for the majority of course students. I know from experience. If you're wondering why are they talking about this cockamamie maybe idea, like why are they even bringing up, where did they get this? Why are they inventing this? What's their angle? What's their motive? Um, I would just ask yourself, like, why does it have a manual for teachers? And when he talks about teachers and pupils, who are these pupils? What is being taught by the teacher to the pupil? Anyway, if there is evidence here to engage with and to brush it away like we've always known it's self-study, or like, what's their motive here? That doesn't, you need to engage with the actual evidence in the book. It doesn't matter what we've all said to each other. It doesn't matter what Helen and Bill thought. None of that matters. What matters is what's printed in the book from the author.
Along that line, I'm seeing some comments in the chat related to being teachers and students of one another. And while the course does say that to teach is to demonstrate, which means we're teaching all the time based on what thought system we're demonstrating, there is a real need for people to step up and lead others through this material. And so I know you just mentioned our study group
Can I,
leader
can I, before
training.
you, can I break in one more time? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
We have time. Um, yeah, we love the quote, "We are all teachers and students of each other," which is not from A Course in Miracles. That's from Attitudinal Healing.
I should have
Um,
known that would be like
yeah.
blood in the water for you.
um,
Like
but
a red cape in front of a bull.
what the Course says is at the end of the manual, it says only time divides teacher and pupil. Now, does that mean nothing divides teacher and pupil? There's no difference. Teachers are pupils, pupils are teachers. No, it means that right now, the teacher is a teacher, and right now, at this moment in time, the pupil is not yet a teacher. The pupil will become a teacher if all goes well. But to say that time divides them is to say that right now, they are not the same thing. The teacher is teaching the pupil. We have a hard time with that because of lots of conditioning and because frankly our ego just loves the idea that, no one's the teacher over me.
Well, I know we are running out of time. We're almost at the top of the hour. So I'll just share again. I know you were mentioning this a minute ago, Robert. As we're recording this, it's January of 2025. We will be leading a 9-week intensive next month on how to teach the text if you want to be a study group leader. The classes will be only 30 minutes a piece, and they'll be every Wednesday and Friday from 11 a.m. to 11:30. And that course will run from February 19th through April 18th. And if you want to learn more about our study group leader training, you can visit circleofa.org/events. And if you missed the live recordings or you are watching this after we've hosted study group leader training, it will all be recorded and available online. So if you do feel called, if you do feel that sacred calling to share this work with others and be a study group leader and have that be a runway onto being a teacher of pupils, then we hope that you'll join us. And Robert, before I close this out, is there anything else that you want to say, or did you say it all?
I've probably said it all, but if you give me the opportunity, I might repeat myself a little bit. I would just like people to, if you can, open your mind to two things. One is that this is actually there in the book. And two, to the possibility that if Jesus instituted this system, we should not view it with dread and a sense of recoil, but a sense of the possibilities inherent in this. What kind of students could be turned out by this? What kind of tradition could be turned out by this? Could the course be achieving results in all of our lives far beyond what it has yet achieved? And then could the course be giving gifts to the world far beyond what it has yet given?
And also think about how much you've learned, either here at the circle or through other teachers who have saved you time on your own journey with the course. And what a gift it would be to be able to share what you've learned with someone else to save them time on their journey. And that's God's plan for salvation, right?
That is, yeah. I
That's
mean,
that's how we get there.
one of
And
the lines,
more, go
sorry,
ahead.
I keep interrupting you. One of the lines you and I like to quote, which was softened in the FIP edition, but we have it as it was taken down originally in the CE, is without God's teachers, how's it go? Without God's teachers, there would be
There'd
no
be no
hope
hope.
of salvation. That got softened to there would be little hope of salvation, but that's not what Helen took down from Jesus. Without God's teachers, there would be no hope of salvation. That's an honoring of the teacher role that we don't really do in course circles where we say, well, we're all teachers and students of each other. Like, let's honor that. Teachers are needed or salvation can't be reached.
Well, we'll leave it there. And our hope is that the next time you hear the course is self-study, there's a little bell that goes off in your mind that says, no, there's a manual for teachers, and Jesus has this whole plan in mind for how teachers take pupils through this material. And that's his plan for the salvation of the world. And so, thank you for watching or listening to this podcast. We hope that you've gained something valuable from it. And on behalf of Robert and I and everyone at the Circle, we will see you next time. Bye for now.